things run through this system to a high level, we're going to do some things. This here is one of my favorite slides, and if you've ever heard me speak, you've probably heard me share this slide because I have it in just about every presentation that I do. Okay, and I usually bring it up right after I talk about Neil Dennis because what's this plant right here? Those of you in the front that can read it, what does that say? Canada thistle. Don't ever refer to it as Canada thistle if you go speak in Canada. I made that mistake, and I about got taken out to the back alley. And I said, because I heard the groan just go through the entire audience, and there was hundreds of them, and the lighting was such that I couldn't really see them, but the spotlight was here, so I heard this, and I got a little bit scared. But I asked them right then and there, I said, well, if you don't call it Canada thistle, I respect that, but I need a name. And without even expressing to them, there was I don't know, a dozen people hollered out California thistle. So we've gone with that ever since. But in this deal here, we've got smooth brome, which maybe you have, or maybe you have something similar, okay? Shallow rooted, nitrogen hog, doesn't necessarily like a lot of competition, holds its own pretty well. Over here we've got big blue stem, okay, listed right up here. When you rent, or you buy, or you lease a piece of ground, whether it's for your garden, it's a pasture, it's a crop field, how do you lease that? What are the units that you lease it in? Now, you might lease it in terms of animal unit months or something like that, but if you're going to lease it based on the size of the land, what are the units that you use? How is land measured? Acres. How many dimensions is acres? It's 2, right? Length times width. Okay? 43,560 square feet, right? Okay? Square feet. Well, if we operate with that mentality when we're managing our landscape, we are basically telling ourselves that we only utilize this right up here, which is easy to fall into that trap. Why? Because that's what we can see. But guess what? Unless there's some sort of restriction in your lease, what do you also have access to? Depth, the third dimension. Most of us either don't use it or don't give it the credit that it maybe should have, or certainly we don't utilize it to the depth that we could. When you hear a rancher say, I have increased my carrying capacity, I've doubled it, but I have not leased or bought an additional acre, where did they get that extra capacity from? They tapped into the third dimension so that they could grow more of these things, California thistle or not. Most of the time, things like that will disappear as we manage towards the things that we want, rather than getting hung up on the things. We could spend all day, every day, focusing on the things that we don't want, right? In fact, in our retreats in our schools, we do an activity that we're not going to do today, but we do an activity and we put people through a couple of exercises, and what tends to come out of that exercise is where people's focus is really at. Do you think it's more on the positive side, or do you think it's more on the negative side on a daily basis? Negative. Most people tend to lean towards this negative side. All the things that they don't want. All the things that they don't like. All the things that bother them. And when something bothers you enough, what do you eventually do? You go make some drastic decision about it. Now, in some cases, that might be appropriate. Something to do with your family or something to do, emergency type thing. But when it has to do with California thistle, sometimes the decision's not all that great. Okay, earlier we were talking about definitions, holistic, regenerative. Here's part of my mindset when it comes to these things. I worked for 13 years for NRCS Conservation District. I worked with the Burleigh County Soil Conservation District, with the Minokan Farm. I got to travel quite a bit and work in a number of different area and county offices, but all of that tended to be based on conservation. Conservation to me is all about minimizing the loss, right? Let's lose as little as absolutely possible. And if you go to my county where our ranch is at, what's considered tolerable is to lose 3 tons of soil per acre per year. And I'm still in compliance. Do you think that's where I really want to be? Is that where you would want to be? Okay, so then what's the next level? Well, the word sustainable gets thrown around an awful lot, right? And you can take any of these terms and throw them up as marketing terms at this point. But just for the exercise, sustaining to me is we keep what we have. We're not gaining anything, but at least we're not losing anything. But then it got brought up earlier about taking something that was lesser and making it more, rebuilding, taking something and actually regenerating. Just like Tara said, we're not just regenerating our financial situation or our relationships, but it's also the landscape, right? So we're regenerating or rebuilding, and I've got the minus, the 0, and the plus to go along with that. Any questions on the biological piece before I mesh in or tie in the financial piece of this? Okay, if at any point you're like, Josh, you're the most boring speaker I've ever listened to, can we please take a break? Sleeping?
I'm listening too.
If you're like my father, and this is like, since I was their age, I can remember my father sitting, and it didn't matter if it was at a meeting, or if it was at church, or his recliner at home, but like, you're like, yeah, he's out. And so we would start having conversations with the idea that he couldn't hear us, right? The things that that man can recall when we thought he was out. And to this day, he still does that, doesn't he? Like, he falls asleep. He's even snoring, and he recalls things that get taught. I don't know how. Maybe I'll have that ability someday. I'm hoping so. But I don't have it right now. So if the main attraction to, and I'm going to confess something to you here. The main attraction to holistic management revolved around all of the exciting things that come from soils and plants and animals, right? Now that may not be your connection to it, maybe you don't have a connection to it, but for me that was it. That was this exciting part about how we're going to take cattle and cattle ranching, and it could be sheep or goats or other ruminants, it doesn't have to be cattle, but how we're going to take cattle and how we're going to save the world, right? The problem is we got to be able to do that in such a way at an appropriate intensity in a particular order so that we don't go broke in the process. That was one of the things that we didn't account for to the level that we needed to. How I was taught, and probably more appropriately, how I absorbed the soil health information, oftentimes I heard, if you just do the right practices, and if you just take care of the soil, it will take care of you, and it will also take care of your financial situation. I think that's dangerous. Now, not once did I say that any of those soil health practices were bad, but I've seen some people put in some long-term things and they did not get the benefits soon enough before they ran out of money. Or they put too much credence into, hey, this is going to help us here, this is going to help us here, this is going to help us here, and they didn't make it to the finish line. Making money, and probably even to a greater degree early on, cash flow, makes a huge difference. And I've been on the underside of that. We have been on the underside of that. And it's not fun, it's scary, and it really caused us to question, where did we go wrong? What did we not do? This was supposed to fix itself by default. Now, if you can lower your inputs and you move your calving date and you do this and you try cover crops and you do no-till, all of those things absolutely can bring value to your farm and to your bank account. But we can't exclude this part and assume it's just going to figure itself out. That's my opinion. You can disagree with me. Maybe your experience has been different. The other thing is it depends on where you're at in your career. If you're at a place in your career where you have quite a bit of equity built up, or you've got some things paid for, or you're in a good, stable situation, but you're going to move down the soil health path because you believe it's the right thing to do, not because you're in a terrible financial situation, what you are going to be able to do and how fast you're going to be able to do it is going to be quite a bit different than a 20-something-year-old, maybe freshly married, and we're going to jump into this thing, and we're going to do all these soil health practices, and we're going to, make all the money we need. starting from scratch versus starting from second base versus almost all the way to home. Those are very different places career-wise. And it's not right or wrong, but it's recognizing what your situation is will determine how intensely you can move forward with these things. And the goal is eventually to be able to get all the way where you want to go with each of these practices. But some of these maybe can't go whole hog day number one and expect the outcome to be what you had hoped. But let's dive into what makes holistic financial planning a little different. And this was kind of a big aha moment for me years and years ago when I first learned this. But if you are going to put together the most basic equation of how to figure profit, what do you think I and E stand for? Income minus expenses equal profit, right? What happens if E is higher than I? The P becomes negative, right? Which means you didn't make a profit. Can that happen in agriculture? Does it happen in agriculture? From a production-focused mindset, we always did this. And if P was negative, what do you think we went back and tried to do? How do we increase income? How do we lower our expenses? How do we increase income? How do we lower expenses? The problem is that oftentimes if you want to increase production, which gets you more I, right? Gets you more income, what also tends to increase with it? Expenses. Okay, so let's go the other direction. What happens if we start cutting E? We start cutting expenses. What can that do to your production? It starts to draw that down. And it becomes this constant battle between the two. Now, if markets are good, weather's good, labor's available, all the pieces fall into place, what do we have? Well, we have a good year, right? How often do all of those things come together the way that we'd like them to? Or is our challenge to expect the unexpected, and therefore, or at least expect things to not be all, pretty and roses and rainbows and everything's going to work out the way that we want it to? Excuse me. We need to be able to take those into account. So the day that I learned this next step, which I'm going to show you, was the day that I started to believe in a different priority of those three variables. The holistic financial planning model does this. And if you take actual numbers, first of all, this is mathematically true. Okay? If you take even like 5 minus 2 equals 3, and then you put those numbers down below, it's mathematically true. It works. But what did we swap out here? What did we do? Or what did this do, I should say? Now, instead of your profit being what's left over, now what's left over? Now what have you put a box around? The expenses, right? Now you might say, okay, what's the value of that? Why put a box around expenses? Why put a limit on expenses? When we start treating profit as an expense, think about this. If you have bills that you owe to other people, and you want to make money yourself, who gets paid last? You usually pay yourself last, right? And that's if there's something left. But as agricultural people, hardworking, very committed to what we do, the whole idea is that we are not going to leave someone else standing, right? We are going to get them paid, we are going to take care of them, we'll put ourselves last. And I'm not suggesting that's a bad mindset or a bad attitude, but what happens is then we tend to sacrifice our profit. But when we put profit on the other side of the equal sign, now all of a sudden we determine what our income is going to be, and then we determine how much of that income is profit due to us, the business. And if we really want to get technical, you actually take your salary out of that, and that becomes an expense over here. Profit is what's on top of that. Oftentimes, most of the books that we've looked at and seen, and we've even done this when we were first getting started, is that salary to the owner-operator and profit, that was one and the same. Like when you had a good year, you got paid. And when you didn't have a great year, you didn't get paid, he's figured out how to survive, right? Salary is an expense. Your job is valuable. If you had to replace you, how much would it cost? People usually are pretty modest, but then when they go start looking and trying to figure out how much it would actually cost to replace them and actually get someone to come. I mean, I'm not talking about what you think it's worth. I'm talking about, hey, you need to advertise, you need to bring someone in that will actually do your job and do it competently. Maybe not quite as well as you, because you are still you, right? But to bring someone in to do that, yeah, you're worth a lot, but we don't pay ourselves much. So the whole process here is to treat profit sacredly. We choose what we want for a profit, and we hold true to that, and then we go to work with all the hard work and all the innovation and all the things that we're always willing to do to survive, and we survive to make that happen, not to, because it's really easy to just kind of fall off the map, and as long as we break even, we can breathe, we can sleep, we can do it again next year, right? We can do without. The problem is you do without too often. What happens to a succession plan at that point if the next generation sees that you've basically just done without for a long time? Is it enticing? That's one of the reasons that I didn't want to go back, is because I thought it was going to take a job, a full-time job here, plus whatever equivalent, full-time equivalent was going to be on the ranch, and I just didn't want to do both. Not because I'm not willing to work hard, I just want value to be achieved out of the work that we do. And slowly but surely with this process, we've been able to do that. Okay, a couple other things here, and then we'll either take a break or shift it back over here to Tara. Dimensional planning, production's the goal, right? If we make more, if we get more income, if we produce more, that's our best chance of being profitable. Possibly. Profit's what's left over, talked about that. Expenses are classified as overhead or variable or direct, if you want to go that route. And oftentimes, and I'm not saying this is any of you, but I've seen it time and time again where we find out at the end of the year whether we made money or not. Not we know whether we're making money every 2 weeks or at least every month. Like, are we on track every month? Are we making money or are we not? And if we need to change something, are we willing to do that? Here, holistic profit planning, we take a little different approach. Profit's the goal. If you're a 500 cow outfit and you can make more money with 200 cows, why don't you do it? We have the mentality that 500's got to be better, right? Now again, maybe I'm speaking to the choir here, but if we're getting paid more per hour, our life's better, our financial situation's better, our risk is lower, and we're making what we need to make, because indefinite growth is not a business plan. How much do you want to make? Is 50,000 profit on top of your salary enough? 100,000, 500,000, 5,000? What do you want to make? Until we actually did that, we were just thinking more is better. And we'd just completely be in the gray, in the clouds all the time. Profits planned first, it's part of that original part of the equation. Expenses are not just, they can still be put into overheads and variables, but we classify them as top priority, a liability, or maintenance, and we're on this thing monthly. We've gone so far as we were not getting it done monthly to where we actually farmed out our books. We actually have an entity out of Wyoming that does our books for us. They give us every month the information we need to make decisions. It's in front of us, in a format that works, diagrammed out, and they are willing to meet with us to decipher through this process. And I'll be honest, we haven't taken full advantage of everything they have to offer, but we are so much further ahead by having someone do that. Do you know how hard that was as a math guy to let go of the books? It took me years to get over that. And what I had to realize is that my value was not in data entry. Could I do it? Yeah, absolutely. My kids can do that. It was not that I wasn't doing my part or holding up my end of the deal. It's that my value was greater in analysis and in decision making, not in the data entry. And I didn't have any more hours in the day that I could find to actually make that happen. The other thing for us, and this was straight out of the soil health, my view on the soil health textbook is that if you get your soils up and running to a really high level, what do you get to do with your input costs or your inputs in general? Lesser and lesser and lesser and lesser, and my goal was 0. And once I went past the 50% mark here, to where I would have been better off focusing on increasing my gross product or my production piece of it. Okay, production's not all bad. We just need to know whether increasing production is more profitable or whether continuing to cut more costs is more profitable. Going to zero on costs might be a great move. It also might completely starve the money out of that enterprise. And that's what we did. We were starting to starve money out of our business because we were so heavy on cutting costs, that we got to the point where we didn't have a lot produced in the first place. We didn't have much for costs, but we didn't have much to sell. And that was a deal we had to get over. And so replacing money with management becomes really, really key for us. This is one way in which you can take input costs and you can start to lower them or sometimes even eliminate them. But oftentimes if you have that input going into your cows or your crop or whatever it might be, that enterprise, if you just take it out and expect everything's gonna just keep going, probably not the case. Meaning that if we're gonna take something out, we probably have to insert a piece of management. Might not cost us anything other than time or labor, but we have to insert something that actually can fill that void. How about this? If you're not making the kind of money that you would like, let's add another enterprise. Let's stack enterprises. Great concept, but it needs to be a functional stacking of enterprises. Like they need to complement each other. If all of a sudden you're doing 2 enterprises now and you're not making enough money, so we're going to do 4 enterprises and none of them relate, what's that going to do to your labor and your time? It is going to pull you in more directions than you're currently being pulled. Generally not good. We've done this sort of thing. Let's add this. Let's produce our own bulls. Let's sell our own bulls. Let's sell replacement heifers. Let's sell bred heifers. Let's do sheep. Let's sell rams. Let's sell breeding stock. We do our coaching and our speaking, and there's about 8 more things that we did at one time until we about ran out of gas. And finally we're able to pull up when we decided here's our centerpiece, here's the complementary pieces. And actually more effort went into our soil health after we did that rather than where we were before. One of these pieces that we did add was sheep. And here's where the true holistic piece of this for us kind of comes front and center. Can sheep do some good things for the landscape? Oh yeah, absolutely. Can sheep be profitable? They actually embarrass our cattle enterprises, honestly. Like they triple them up if we do things even halfway right. Which is really hard for Josh's cowboy mentality. But the sheep do that part. Guess what else the sheep do?
They are my entertainment.
Our whole family's involved. When we work cattle, my kids are, these 2 are getting old enough now where they're on foot sometimes now helping sort and that sort of stuff. But years past, they're either on a horse or they're on the corral. Why? Because a 1,200-pound cow, when she comes in, and we've got cattle that are pretty good, but things still happen, right? You put a cow in a pressured situation, even unintentionally, and things go haywire in a hurry. I've seen these kids take it from a 120-pound ewe pretty hard. Most of the time, pop right back up. They get to participate at a level that they couldn't before, and even Simon, who he's now 5.5, he's not with us, and Simon's kind of intense, and he's kind of a handful, and all of you would know all about Simon if he was here already, probably. But he likes to work, and he wants to be a part of things. It's hard for me to take my 5-year-old and put him in a pen with a bunch of cattle and expect that that's going to work well. With the sheep, he's right in there, right in the middle. Maybe not even where he's supposed to be, but he's learning and he's right in there. And so this piece, as Tara said, is not only been a good fit for our family, they consider it entertainment. Oftentimes, I'm not quite as entertained, okay, as maybe the others, but
I am, and that's what matters.
It was her idea to move back to the ranch.
It was my idea to move to the ranch.
We are a little after 2 right now. Oftentimes, and especially at our schools and retreats, we don't like to sit for any more than an hour. Any questions right now before we take maybe 10 minutes? Just stand up and yeah, get the blood flowing again. Comments, questions? If you want to ask one-on-one questions, you can sure do that as well, either during a break or after our event this evening. Why don't we take about a 10-minute break?
Yep, and if you might already all be aware of this, they are bringing a nacho bar in at 3 p.m. or around that time, so we will have an official break and you will be fed. But so right now, yes, you can stretch, move, grab a drink. Restrooms are just out this door. Question for you as you're coming back to your places. So I'm going to put a question up on the board and I want you to call out the answer. Red. Red. What color are stop signs? They are red. And white. What color are yield signs?
Yellow. And black.
Yellow and black.
Talk with your neighbor. What color are yield signs?
Yellow and black.
What color are yield signs?
White.
I'm hearing yellow. And black. And what's this?
Thinking about corners. Yeah.
Why did we do this? Because sometimes we think we know things, and we think we know it like this, and we react and we move forward with what we think we know. And most of us in here drive, right? I cannot say all of us because I know my children do not yet. But we see yield signs. I can't say everyone on a daily basis, but we see them on a regular basis. We see them all the time. But then why did we say yellow? They did used to be yellow. And we were probably thinking of what? Caution signs, we call them. All right. So this is a fun little activity just to point out the fact that sometimes we think we know, and sometimes we're wrong about things. And I like to be the first to admit that I'm wrong about things, because that's nicer than having somebody else point out that I'm wrong about things. All right, so that is going to lead us into a little story that is true, and it involves me as the daughter and my in-laws and Joshua and his sister. So we were all invited to a conversation talking about the succession plan. What is going to be the succession plan for the ranch when my in-laws are ready to retire? And we all were at the table, the decision makers, right? So the decision makers were at the table and we all got to answer questions about this different process. So we hired a holistic management certified educator to facilitate this kind of conversation. And he asked my mother-in-law first this question: Diana, what does retirement look like for you? Now, like Joshua mentioned, both of them had off-farm jobs, and they had the ranch. And my mother-in-law's response was, well, retirement looks like no cows. No cows. So she's done with her day job, and the ranch no longer has any cows. And then the facilitator asked the exact same question to my father-in-law, and Francis, what does retirement look like for you? And he says, retirement looks like getting more cows. And I'm the daughter-in-law, and I'm just sitting there like, more cows, no cows, you can't do both.
And
So
we
how?
were not a part of the, we were not moving back to the ranch at this point.
Yes.
So this is well before we had well before she decided we were moving back to the ranch.
Right. So we're not moving there. This is just the conversation about what this is going to look like. All right, so when we talk about Joshua right before the break, he spoke to, when we're talking about holistic management or regenerative management, we're being mindful of the different categories. So the finances or the wealth component of it, the land resource-based component of it, and the relationships. So I was sitting there wishing I had popcorn because I wanted to see how this was going to go down. And this trained facilitator asked more important questions to really get to the heart of what it was they really wanted. So a lot of this, when we talk about these relationships and when we talk about communication, we want to talk about why, somebody's why. Why was it that she wanted no cows? And why was it that he wanted more cows? And so we have learned when we do facilitating in our regenerate schools that we teach and in some of the group coaching that we do and in some of the private facilitation, we have learned to ask some of these why questions. And what we have realized is that it really comes down to values. So what was the why behind why my mother-in-law wanted no cows? And it was this. She said, I want to be able to upgrade our camper, and I want more time to travel. So I want to be able to jump in the camper, and I want to be able to just go and travel. So what she was really looking for was freedom, flexibility. She didn't want to be tied to the cattle and the maintenance and the everyday and never ever being able to leave the ranch, like that article. You never ever get to leave, never get to take a family vacation, that kind of thing. Meanwhile, my father-in-law, he's like, well, we'll vacation some, but when I retire from a job that he worked very, very, very hard at on a daily basis, he wanted to retire to something. He wanted to have something to do. And he's not a golfer. And so he's like, my hobby is ranching. And so I want to do this. So I want to have purpose. And I want to have something that keeps me going. So how do we find a way to not compromise? How do we find a way to accommodate? So in this situation, we were able to take something where it seemed like it was going to be very opposite polar. We learned how to ask the right questions. What is the why behind this? What is the value? And then we started working as a family, how can we accommodate this? So years later then, as we did move back to the ranch, which we said we never would do, and then we did, we have worked to accommodate these multi-generational desires so that my in-laws still have an opportunity to be a part of the ranch, and they still have an opportunity to travel. They were just in Arizona for the last month. They got back just last week. So they get to pick up and travel when they want to. My father-in-law still has access to, he still owns some cows and he cares for things and is a big, major part of our ranch kind of on a day-to-day basis when they are home. And we also have the added value of the multi-generational experience, which is probably one of the biggest reasons why I shifted my perspective, where I thought that I was going to feel so trapped and so isolated living on the ranch. I really started to see it as a place where our kids, who were very young at the time, could have opportunities to learn from their grandparents and could put their hands in the soil. And we could grow the kind of food that we needed for the health concerns that we were dealing with. And so we love to have this multi-generational experience, and we know that it's not always easy. Relationships are not always easy to navigate, but we find that when we are intentional about our communication, and we find what people really want, and we know when the right times are to bring an outside facilitator to really get some of those conversations going, it all falls in line with what we have created as our holistic goal or our holistic context. So part of holistic management, and we kind of walk people through some of this process in some of our holistic management schools and in some of our retreats that are multi-day, we ask people to identify their holistic goal or their holistic context. What is it that you really want from a land resource perspective? What is it that you really want for profitability? And what is it that you really want for your relationships and the kind of relationships and the dynamics that will keep your operation going? Because ultimately for my in-laws, it was about the cows, but it became very clear right away that it wasn't about the cows. It was about her wanting freedom and flexibility and him wanting purpose. And so we could work to accommodate both of those things. Do you want to add?
I was just going to add from the story that Tara just told. First of all, the day of that meeting, it was actually St. Patrick's Day.
It was.
And so I went to go pick up my teacher wife at an after-school party she went to with her coworkers, and she's wearing a green wig, wearing a crown, wearing green all
Feather
over.
boa.
And I march her into this room with this facilitator, and his eyebrows raised a little bit when he's like, "This is a succession meeting, and this is what you're gonna bring." Yep, this needs to be here. And I think Tara honestly had why do I have to be a part of this? Like we're not moving back to the ranch. I understand that she understood that I was gonna have some responsibilities at some point because we have this asset to do something with, right? But eventually, as this facilitator walked us through, and her opinion got asked, and my sister's opinion got asked, and this facilitator was on to my parents because my mother is very open with sharing her opinion. My father's very, very reserved. But this is the advantage to a facilitator, and why this kind of spurred our interest in becoming facilitators is we watched all of the value that got brought to the table because of how that facilitator handled each personality in the room, which nobody was a bad personality, it's just we operate differently, right? Some of us, we can't wait to get our words out. And some of us, we wait until there's something we think is really valuable to say, and that's all we say, okay? And so if you can relate to that, or you know that you're in a situation, and it might not be your family, it might be a board that you're on, it might be a family situation, it might be a work situation, whatever that might be, I can't express that this facilitator piece, I mean, it was like aha moments for us throughout that whole meeting. And by the way, I do have one younger sister, I think I mentioned that before. She didn't have to be there. Like she would have probably been just as well on the surface, not being there as well as being there, but the value to her being there, she got the opportunity to say that she did not have interest in the production side of operating the ranch. But she made that known with her own words. Nobody made that assumption on her behalf. Nobody made that decision for her. And now we firmly believe that there's not going to be anything down the road, well, nobody asked my opinion, or I didn't get to be involved, you guys just made decisions on my behalf. No, she was there. She got to be a part of it. And we wanted her to be a part of it because we want this thing to walk down the road with clarity and without, I mean, how many families have you known that when all of a sudden the farmer of the ranch needs to do what it's got to do from a succession standpoint, and everybody was on good terms before, and now guess what? I mean, we probably all know at least one family, if not more than one. Maybe you're even a part of a situation, unfortunately, like that it didn't turn out as well as it could, or maybe it waited too long to start having the conversations that we needed to have. And Tara even came up with this line here a while back, but one of the things that we do is we help people we make your wildest conversations come true.
Ooh, yeah.
Okay, that sounds maybe a little out there, but some of that is really, people really eager to have this conversation, but they don't know how to have it, or maybe they're not the right person to ask the questions. And so that's a piece of this that we really got value out of. And Tara brought this up, retire to something rather than retire from something. The day I quit my job working for the federal government and moved back to the ranch is the day my dad quit his job at the coal mine and was so excited to come home. And it's because, guess what? He was not leaving that. What was he doing? He was coming home to this. And that made all the difference in the world. We've seen, I don't know how many people over the years that they basically end up forced out because they can't do what they used to do, or their value has changed simply because they can't physically do what they used to do. But it never got approached as to what their value was and what role we want them to shift into. It was all about what we needed them to stop doing. Think about that later on in life. Is that real palatable in your mind? If someone tells you, you can't drive anymore, you can't farm anymore, we don't want you here anymore because now we're gonna do this. Doesn't go well. Most of the time, doesn't go well. So that's the type of transition. I just wanted to add that piece because it has meant so much to me for my parents to be there. And trust me, we don't always get along. We don't always have the same ideas. We approach things very differently oftentimes. But when we know that in the end, what our goal is and what our outcome is and what our vision is, we can always lean back on that. And it gives us lots of security and lots of stability moving forward.
Right. So in the holistic management framework, the first step is identifying your whole. And that is within whatever context. And so we have a whole, W-H-O-L-E, our whole situation. Someone mentioned that earlier, our whole situation. We have a whole that includes our family of 5. We also have a whole that includes Joshua's parents.